right, welcome back to AI Paper Podcasts. Today, we're diving straight into a pretty exciting development in image editing. We've got the paper Step1X-Edit, a practical framework for general image editing from the Step1X image team over at Step1. Now, for those of you who just want the quick version, the TLDR for a short clip later, perhaps, they've open sourced this model, Step1X-Edit. And the goal here is ambitious, really. They're aiming to match the performance of those big closed source models, like GPT-4o and Gemini 2 Flash.
Right, which is a tall order.
Totally. And the way they're doing it, it's pretty clever. They use a multimodal LLM that helps it really understand the image and the instructions, and then that's paired with the diffusion image decoder to actually do the editing.
It's not just the model itself, right?
Exactly. They didn't stop there. They also built this huge, high-quality data set. We're talking over 1 million examples covering 11 different kinds of editing tasks.
Which is foundational, really. You need good data for this stuff.
Absolutely. And finally, they introduced something called GEdit-Bench. It's a new benchmark specifically designed to see how well these models handle real-world editing requests.
Okay, so moving beyond just synthetic tests.
Precisely. And the early results they show on GEdit-Bench are striking. Step1X-Edit apparently significantly outperforms the existing open source options and gets remarkably close, even beating in some areas, those top proprietary models. Okay, so with that snapshot in mind, let's unpack the details.
Yeah, let's get into it. What's really compelling, I think, is the core problem they're tackling. Anyone who's been keeping an eye on image editing has seen these incredible leaps from the closed source guys. GPT-4o, Gemini, the demos are amazing.
Right, they look like magic sometimes.
Exactly. Yeah. But that progress hasn't really filtered down to the open source world quite as effectively, not to the same degree. And instruction-based editing, which is, let's face it, how most people want to interact, just telling it what to do.
Yeah, naturally. Make the sky bluer, move this person.
Right. That presents some tough challenges.
Right.
The model needs to understand your language, which can be nuanced, right? Then it needs to figure out where in the image to make the change, localize it, and then actually perform the edit without messing up the rest of the image quality.
Yeah.
That's the hard part.
Yeah, preserving the original feel while changing just one specific thing. We've seen diffusion models get really good at generating images from scratch, absolutely. But the paper points out, and it makes sense, that just sort of sticking a text encoder onto a diffusion model doesn't always cut it for complex edits.
Right, it might struggle with subtle instructions.
Exactly. It's like it gets the general idea but maybe misses the finer points, The alignment between your requests and the output can be a bit off.
And from a research perspective, that lack of transparency, the inability to reproduce results from the big closed models, that's a real bottleneck. It's hard to build on something you can't fully examine or understand.
Yeah, you can't really dig into how it works.
Right. And meanwhile, the existing open source efforts, things like Omnigen and ACE plus that, they're valuable contributions, no doubt.
Yeah.
But they haven't quite reached that same level of generalization, accuracy, and just sheer output quality that we're seeing elsewhere. There's still a gap.
Okay, so Step1's team basically said, right, let's try and close this gap. Their goal wasn't just to make another model, but one that's truly competitive, and also, importantly, to improve how we even evaluate these things based on actual user needs.
And it seems like a core part of their thinking was that the existing open source datasets were maybe holding things back. They argue pretty convincingly, I think, that you need massive scale and high quality in your training data to really compete with the resources behind the closed models.
Which makes total sense. Garbage in, garbage out, right? Or maybe just mediocre in, mediocre out.
Yeah, something like that. And this leads us straight into their data creation process, which is seriously impressive. They knew they needed something big and good, so they started by web crawling just tons of image editing examples.
Just gathering everything they could find.
Pretty much. Then they organized it all, systematically, into 11 distinct editing task categories, referencing some existing work, but really building it out. And these 11 categories, they're designed to cover, a really comprehensive range of things people actually do when editing images. Figure 3 in the paper shows them all.
Okay, and we're not talking a small data set here. You mentioned massive.
Oh, yeah. Their initial pipeline generated something like over 20 million triplets. That's the source image, the instruction, and the target edited image.
Wow, okay.
But, and this is crucial, they didn't just use all of that raw data. They put it through a really rigorous filtering process. They used other MLLMs, including their own internal model called Step1O, plus human annotators, to basically sift through and pick out the best examples. Keep the quality high.
So quality control was key.
Absolutely. And this intensive filtering resulted in the final Step1X-Edit dataset, which still has over 1 million high-quality samples.
Okay, that's still huge.
It is. The paper has a comparison chart, Figure 2, and it just dwarfs most existing editing datasets in scale. Even their high-quality subset, the HQ version, is substantial.
That alone is a pretty big contribution to the community.
Definitely. And what's also really insightful is looking at how they generated the data for specific tasks. It wasn't just one method fits all.
Right, you mentioned 11 categories.
Yeah, so take something like changing colors or modifying the material of an object. They used object detection first to find the thing you want to change, then depth estimation, using a tool called geodepth to understand the 3D scene structure.
Okay, getting that spatial context.
Exactly. And that info, plus the image, went into ControlNet with a diffusion model to actually change the appearance, the color, the texture, while crucially trying to keep the object's identity the same.
That makes sense. You want to change the shirt color, not turn the person into someone else.
Precisely. It's about targeted, consistent edits.
What about something trickier, like changing text in an image?
Yeah, text modification is tough. They had a clever approach there too. They used an OCR tool, PPOCR, to identify the text, and also to help figure out if an edit request was even valid, like is there actually text there to change. And they also used their Step1O model again to double-check the correctness of the edited text regions. Plus, importantly, manual post-processing by humans to catch errors.
That human validation seems essential for complex tasks like text.
I think so. And then there's motion change, which is another really interesting one. They actually used videos from a dataset called Koala 36M. They'd extract pairs of frames to represent motion.
Okay, using video as a source for static image edits? Clever.
Yeah. Then they use specialized networks, BiRefNet and RAFT, to separate foreground and background and estimate optical flow. Basically, figure out how things are moving.
Right, track the pixels.
And then, get this, they use GPT-4o to translate those observed motion changes into natural language instructions, like make the car look like it's moving faster.
Wow, okay, that's a multi-stage pipeline, combining different AI tools.
Totally. It really bridges the visual dynamics in the text instructions.
What about things like portrait editing or style transfer?
For portraits and beautification, they gathered data from public sources, but also had human editors create examples. Their Step1O model helped check for consistency in things like layout and background. And for style transfer, they handled it both ways, stylized to photorealistic and photo to stylized. They used edge extraction and controlled diffusion, and they targeted specific, popular styles: Ghibli, ink painting, oil painting, even pixel art.
So covering a lot of artistic ground there.
Definitely. And the last category, tone transformation, think color grading, dehazing, making it look like a different season, that relied more on algorithmic tools and standard filters.
So a pragmatic mix of neural nets and traditional techniques.
Exactly. Use the best tool for the job for each type of edit they needed in the data set.
Okay, that data generation is intense. What about the instructions themselves? How do they make sure those were good?
Good question. They had a specific captioning strategy. One part they call redundancy-enhanced annotation. It's kind of iterative. Results from one round of annotation get fed back as context for the next round.
Like a feedback loop.
Yeah, exactly. It helps improve semantic consistency and cuts down on the model just making stuff up, hallucinations. Deterministic info gets confirmed repeatedly.
Okay, smart.
And they also used stylized annotation via contextual examples. Basically, showing the annotator human or model examples of the kind of description they wanted in terms of tone, detail, structure.
So guiding the style of the instructions themselves.
Right, for consistency. And one last key point about the data. It's all bilingual, Chinese and English.
Oh, that's great for accessibility and broader use.
Yeah, it makes the dataset much more valuable for training and evaluating multilingual models.
Okay, so we have this incredible dataset. Now let's finally talk about the model itself. Step1X-Edit. What's under the hood?
Right, the architecture. The paper explains it combines basically two main things: the semantic reasoning power of an MLLM.
A multimodal large language model.
Exactly. Specifically, they use Quinn VL, and that's paired with a DIT style diffusion architecture.
DIT meaning diffusion transformer.
Right. So Quinn VL processes the input image and the editing prompt, understands what's needed, and generates what they call a target image latent condition. You can think of that as like a compressed, smart representation of the goal image based on the visuals and the text.
Kind of like an intermediate goalpost for the diffusion model.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. This latent condition is then fed into the DIT diffusion model, which does the heavy lifting of generating the final pixels of the edited image. And a key challenge, they note, is balancing two things. Reconstructing the original image accurately where it's not supposed to change, and faithfully making the changes specified in the instructions. It's a balancing act.
Makes sense. You don't want it to ignore the instruction, but you also don't want it to hallucinate wildly and change everything.
Precisely. And to make sure the output looks good aesthetically and is visually consistent, they actually initialize Step1X-Edit's training, starting from a pre-trained text-to-image model.
Leveraging existing generative capabilities.
Yeah, it gives them a good starting point for visual quality. And it also means they could potentially swap in different base T2I models like SD3, FLUX, others they mentioned. It gives them flexibility.
Okay, let's get a bit more technical on the architecture details. How do the pieces connect?
Sure. So the reference image first goes through a standard VAE encoder, gets turned into latent features. These features are then projected linearly to become reference image tokens.
Okay.
Separately, Quinn processes the text instruction and the image to get embeddings representations for both. Then there's this lightweight module they call a connector, kind of like a token refiner, that takes all these different embeddings and restructures them into a compact multimodal representation, merging the signals.
And they do something with averaging embeddings too.
Yeah, that's interesting. They take the mean of the relevant embeddings from Quinn, project that through a linear layer, and create this global guidance vector. It sounds like a way to capture the overall gist, the high-level understanding from Quinn to guide the whole diffusion process.
Right, like a general directions signal.
Exactly. And then how do they combine all these features to feed into the DIT? They chose token concatenation. They mentioned this follows a strategy from another paper, a mini control. The idea is that concatenating tokens gives a good balance.
Balance between what?
Between being responsive to the specific editing instructions and preserving all the fine details from the original input image.
Okay, so it helps keep details while still listening to the prompt.
That's the goal. They found it worked better than alternatives like channel concatenation or causal self-attention. So these concatenated image tokens, along with noise tokens, form the final input for the DIT network. Figure 5 in the paper illustrates this.
And how is it trained? What's the loss function?
They optimize the connector and the DIT jointly, using just the standard diffusion loss. They mention using a rectified flow formulation. And interestingly, they managed to get stable training without needing an explicit mask loss.
Which some other models, like Omnigen, did rely on.
Exactly. So, potentially a simpler, cleaner training process. They just used a fixed learning rate too.
Okay, powerful model, great data. The next logical step is evaluation, right? And that's where GEdit-Bench comes in.
You got it. GEdit-Bench. The motivation here was clear. They wanted a benchmark that reflects how people actually try to edit images. Real-world stuff.
Not just lab-created prompts.
Right. So they collected over 1,000 examples from the internet. Places like Reddit were mentioned, where users posted images and asked for edits.
Like those Photoshop requests subreddits?
Probably stuff like that, yeah. Real user requests. They then manually sorted these into their 11 task categories. They also made sure to filter out duplicates or very similar instructions to keep the benchmark diverse.
Exactly.
The final benchmark has 606 testing examples, paired with reference images from real-life situations.
And they addressed privacy, you mentioned.
Yeah, which is really important when you're using user-generated content. They had a de-identification protocol. They tried to find similar public domain images to replace user uploads, or if they couldn't, they carefully modified the instructions to remove identifying info. Figure 6 shows this.
Good. Responsible approach there.
Okay.
The moment of truth, the results on GEdit-Bench. How did Step1X-Edit stack up?
They tested against a whole bunch of models. Open source, Instruct Pix, Magic Brush, AnyEdit, Omnigen, and proprietary. GPT-4o, Dubao, which is popular in China, and Gemini 2 Flash.
Quite the lineup. How did they measure performance?
They use a metric called VIE score. It breaks down into semantic consistency to follow the instruction. Conceptual qualities that look good, and an overall score. And interestingly, the scoring itself was done automatically, using GPT-4o and Quinn 2.5 VL72B, using AI to evaluate AI.
Okay. Meta evaluation.
Kind of, yeah. And they did this for both the English instructions and the Chinese translations included in the benchmark.
So what did the scores show?
Quantitative results, the numbers are pretty striking. Across all 11 editing categories, Step1X-Edit consistently beat the other open source models, like significantly.
Okay, so clear win for open source there. What about against the big guys?
That's where it gets really interesting. It actually surpassed Gemini 2 Flash overall. according to their metrics. And it even beat GPT-4o in specific areas like style change and color alteration.
Wow, beating GPT-4o on some tasks. That's big news for an open source model.
It really is. Looking at the tables in the paper, Table 2 for English benchmarks, Step1X-Edit shows a big jump over Omnigen and gets scores comparable to Gemini 2 Flash and Dubao. On Chinese instructions, GEdit-Bench and Cyan in Table 3, its performance was also very strong, sometimes even better than Gemini 2 Flash and Dubao.
So strong multilingual performance too.
Seems like it. The paper also includes visual examples, figures 8 and 9, showing side-by-side comparisons for different edits in both languages. Those really help you see the quality differences.
Visuals are always good for image stuff. Did they do any human evaluation? Sometimes automatic metrics don't tell the whole story.
They did. They ran a user preference study. Blinded, subjective. Participants looked at outputs from the top 4 methods, Gemini, Dubao, GPT-4o, and Step1X-Edit without knowing which was which, and rated the quality on a 5-point scale.
And how did Step1X-Edit do there with human eyes?
It achieved comparable subjective quality to the other leading models, including the proprietary ones. So humans thought it was roughly in the same league. They do mention Gemini 2 Flash got particularly high user preference scores, and they speculate it might be because it's really good at preserving subject identity, which users seem to value a lot in the study.
Ah, okay. So maybe different strength appeal differently in subjective tests. Still, being comparable is a huge achievement.
Absolutely.
So let's step back. What's the big picture takeaway here?
I think Step1X-Edit represents a really significant leap forward for open source image editing. It genuinely seems to be bridging that performance gap we talked about earlier with the top closed source models.
Yeah, it feels like a milestone.
Definitely. The combination they've used a powerful MLLM for understanding, a high-fidelity diffusion decoder for generating, all trained on that massive, carefully curated dataset. It seems like a winning formula for general image editing.
And the new benchmark, GEdit-Bench, that feels like a contribution that will last, helping the whole field evaluate models more realistically.
Totally agree. Moving evaluation towards real-world user needs is crucial.
The performance across different tasks, different languages, it really speaks to the robustness of their unified approach.
And the fact that they're open sourcing the model and the data generation pipeline, that's huge. That could really spur a lot more innovation and research in the open community. People can build on this, experiment with it.
It really makes you wonder, right? What comes next? Now that there's a powerful open source framework like this out there, what kind of new applications or improvements are we going to see?
Yeah, it's exciting. People can start integrating this into tools, maybe fine-tuning it for specific domains. The possibilities open up quite a bit.
Definitely an exciting space to watch in AI right now. A big step for open source image editing.